The Duke found the widow chained in the cellar. He carried her out and made her his duchess. The lantern flickered as Gabriel Thorn, Duke of Evermere, descended the cellar stairs. Above him, thunder rolled across the countryside, shaking the walls of the half-abandoned estate he'd just inherited from a distant cousin. The steward had tried to stop him from coming down here, had made excuses about rats and flooding, but Gabriel hadn't built his reputation by accepting convenient lies. Then he heard it. A faint scraping sound, a hoarse voice that might have been a moan or a word. "What was that?" Gabriel demanded. The steward's face went pale. "Nothing, Your Grace, just the storm." "Leave us!" Gabriel's voice was ice. "Now!" The steward fled up the stairs. Gabriel lifted his lantern higher and moved deeper into the darkness. The cellar was vast and neglected, full of rotting crates and abandoned furniture. But in the far corner, something moved. Gabriel's breath caught as the lantern light fell upon a figure huddled against the stone wall. A woman, dressed in torn but once respectable clothes. Her dark hair hung matted around a face that was bruised and hollow with exhaustion. And around her ankle, a heavy iron shackle connected to a bolt in the wall. She flinched at the light, throwing up her hands as if expecting a blow. "Please," she rasped. "Please, I'll be quiet. I won't cause trouble." Gabriel stood frozen for a moment, shock and fury warring in his chest. Then he moved, kneeling beside her with careful slowness. "I'm not here to hurt you." His voice came out rough. "My name is Gabriel Thorn. I'm the Duke of Evermere. This estate now belongs to me." The woman, a widow, he guessed, from her plain black dress, stared at him with eyes that held no trust. Another duke, another man with power over me. "I'm going to get you out of here." Gabriel stood, raising his voice to a commanding shout. "Steward, bring me the keys to this shackle, now!" It took 3 minutes for the trembling steward to appear with the keys. 3 minutes during which Gabriel removed his coat and wrapped it around the woman's thin shoulders. She protested weakly. "You shouldn't trouble yourself, Your Grace. I can manage. No human being belongs in chains on my land." Gabriel's voice was hard. "Not for any reason, not ever." The shackle fell away, revealing raw, bruised skin beneath. The woman tried to stand and immediately swayed. Gabriel caught her before she could fall. "Can you walk?" I think so." She couldn't. Her legs gave out after 3 steps. Without hesitation, Gabriel swept her into his arms and carried her toward the stairs. "This isn't necessary," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's entirely necessary." He climbed the stairs with her weight against his chest, stepping into the hallway where servants had gathered, their faces pale with shock. A footman gaped. The housekeeper crossed herself. "Prepare a guest room immediately," Gabriel ordered. "Send for a doctor, and someone find out how long this woman has been imprisoned in my cellar." In a hastily prepared bedroom, the doctor examined the woman, Mrs. Eleanor Hart. She finally told them while Gabriel waited in the hallway, his fury building with every minute. When the doctor emerged, his face was grim. "Dehydration, malnutrition, bruising. She's been down there at least a week, possibly longer. Another few days and—" He didn't finish. Gabriel entered the room to find Eleanor propped against pillows, looking slightly more human after water and broth. Her eyes tracked him warily. "Mrs. Hart," he said, keeping his voice gentle, "I need to understand what happened to you." "Why?" Her voice was flat. "So you can decide whether I deserved it. So I can ensure whoever did this faces consequences." She studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she began to speak. "My husband, Henry Hart, died a year ago. His brother Oswald took control of the estate. I discovered he was stealing from it, forging documents, draining accounts. When I threatened to expose him, he declared me unwell and had me brought here." Her voice cracked. He said no one would believe a hysterical widow over a respectable gentleman. Gabriel's hands clenched at his sides. You were imprisoned to keep you silent. I was imprisoned because I'm inconvenient. Eleanor's eyes met his. And now I'm your problem, your grace. A scandal waiting to happen. A woman found chained in your cellar. Imagine what people will say. She was right. Gabriel understood instantly how dangerous this situation was. A woman imprisoned on property he now owned. Lawyers, magistrates, newspapers, if this was handled badly, he would be blamed. But he also knew what he'd seen in that cellar, what kind of cruelty it took to chain a woman in the dark and leave her there to suffer. This lady is under my protection now, he announced to the assembled servants. See that a proper room is prepared in my London residence. Tomorrow we leave this place. As the household scrambled to obey, Gabriel paused at Eleanor's bedside. She was drifting into sleep, exhaustion finally claiming her. Who chains a widow in a cellar? He murmured to the doctor. I will have answers. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, just for a moment. Something that might have been hope flickered in their depths. Then she slept, and Gabriel began to plan. 1. Eleanor woke in a proper bedroom for the first time in weeks. For a terrifying moment, she thought she was still in the cellar, still chained, still trapped in darkness. Her hand flew to her ankle. Nothing. No iron, no shackle. Just her own skin, tender but free. We only chain the guests we don't like, ma'am. Eleanor's head whipped toward the voice. A brisk woman in a maid's uniform stood by the window, arranging curtains with efficient movements. I'm Martha, the woman continued. His Grace assigned me to look after you. There's hot water for washing and a clean dress laid out. Nothing fancy, but it'll do until we can get you proper clothes. Where am I? The Duke's London residence. You slept through the whole journey, poor thing. Doctor said it was the first real rest you'd had in days. Eleanor sat up slowly, taking stock of her body. Everything ached, but it was the ache of healing rather than fresh injury. The borrowed nightgown she wore was too large, but it was clean and soft against her skin. She was safe. The thought felt foreign, untrustworthy. A knock at the door made her flinch. Martha answered it, exchanged quiet words with someone, then turned back. His Grace requests a moment of your time, ma'am. When you're ready, no rush, he says. An hour later, washed and dressed in a simple grey gown that Martha had produced from somewhere, Eleanor sat in a sunny parlour while the Duke of Evermere regarded her with calm, assessing eyes. He looked different in daylight, younger than she'd thought, perhaps 32 or 33. Handsome in a severe way, with dark hair and a jaw that suggested stubbornness. He carried himself like a man accustomed to command, but there was something else in his expression. Genuine concern, perhaps, or very good acting. Eleanor had learned to distrust both. Mrs. Hart, Gabriel began formally. I apologize for the circumstances of our meeting. I need to understand everything that happened to you, but I want you to know that whatever you tell me will not leave this room without your permission. You want my story so you can decide what to do with me. I want your story so I can help you. Eleanor laughed, a harsh sound. Help me, Your Grace? I've learned what help from powerful men looks like. It looks like being declared mad. It looks like chains. Oswald Hart is not me. No, you're a duke. You have more power than he ever did. Eleanor's voice sharpened. What's to stop you from doing the same thing if I become inconvenient? Gabriel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Nothing, I suppose, except my word. And what is a duke's word worth to a woman who's been locked in a cellar? The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor expected anger, dismissal, the cold withdrawal of whatever temporary protection he'd offered. Instead, Gabriel nodded slowly. "That's fair. You have no reason to trust me, so let me offer you something more concrete than words." He outlined his plan. Eleanor would stay in his household as a distant cousin's widow, serving as a companion to his elderly aunt, Lady Agnes. Meanwhile, he would quietly investigate Oswald, the will, the false imprisonment. "And when you have your evidence?" Eleanor asked. "What then?" "Then we expose him, properly, legally, in a way that protects you and punishes him." You make it sound simple. It won't be, but I've handled complicated matters before. Eleanor studied him, searching for the trap. There was always a trap with men like this. "What do you get out of it? Why help me at all?" Gabriel was quiet for a moment. "Because I found a woman chained in a cellar on my property, and I cannot pretend I didn't. Because walking away from that would make me complicit. Because," he paused, "because some things are simply wrong, Mrs. Hart, and allowing them to continue is also wrong." "You're very certain of yourself?" "I'm certain of what I saw in that cellar. The rest, I'm figuring out as I go." Before Eleanor could respond, the door burst open, and a tiny, fierce woman in her 70s swept into the room. "Gabriel, the servants are in an uproar about some mysterious widow you've installed in my guest room. I came to see—" She stopped, examining Eleanor with sharp, bird-like eyes. "Ah, so you're the one. Aunt Agnes." Gabriel's voice held a note of warning. "This is Mrs. Eleanor Hart. Mrs. Hart, my aunt, Lady Agnes Thorne. Charmed, I'm sure." Lady Agnes circled Eleanor like a hawk assessing prey. "Well, you don't look mad. A bit thin, perhaps. Have they fed you?" "Yes, my lady." "Good." Gabriel has a terrible habit of forgetting that people need meals, too busy brooding about justice and duty. She shot her nephew a look. "So, you're to be my companion, I hear. Can you play cards?" "Tolerably." "Read aloud without mumbling?" "Yes." "Excellent, you'll do." Lady Agnes settled into a chair with the air of someone who had just decided everything. "Now, tell me the whole story. Gabriel gives me the shortened version, and I always miss the interesting parts." Despite everything, Eleanor felt her lips twitch toward a smile. 2. 3 weeks in London transformed Eleanor in ways she hadn't expected. She learned the rhythms of the Duke's household: breakfast at 8, correspondence at 10, calls in the afternoon. She accompanied Lady Agnes to teas and card parties, sitting quietly in corners while society women chatted about scandals and fashions. She discovered that Gabriel Thorne was a man of precise habits and unexpected kindnesses. He worked late in his study most nights, but he always asked about her health at breakfast. He arranged for a seamstress to provide her with proper clothes, refusing to hear her protests about charity. "Consider it compensation for entertaining my aunt," he said dryly. "She's exhausting, and you've earned hazard pay." They crossed paths more often than seemed accidental. In the library, where Eleanor read while Gabriel reviewed documents. At breakfast, where their conversations grew longer each morning. In the hallway, where she once caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're staring, Your Grace." "Observing. There's a difference." "And what have you observed?" "That you've stopped flinching when doors open." His voice was soft. "That's progress." Eleanor didn't know what to say to that. Meanwhile, Gabriel's investigation proceeded quietly. His solicitor uncovered forged signatures on documents transferring Eleanor's widow's portion to Oswald. A trusted agent found evidence of systematic embezzlement. The case against Oswald Hart grew stronger by the day, but so did the whispers. Eleanor heard them first from the servants, then from Lady Agnes's friends. A young widow living in a duke's household. How convenient, how suspicious. "They think I'm your mistress," Eleanor told Gabriel one evening, her voice flat. "I know. They think I've trapped you somehow, that I'm scheming for money or position. I know." Gabriel set down the letter he'd been reading. "Does it matter what they think? It matters for you. Your reputation, my reputation, will survive gossip." His eyes met hers. "Will you?" The question hit harder than she'd expected. "I've survived worse than whispers." "That's not an answer." Eleanor turned away, staring out the window at the London evening. "I should leave. Remove myself so I won't damage you further." "And go where? Back to Oswald's reach?" "Anywhere. I'll manage." "You'll be destroyed." Gabriel's voice was sharp. "Alone, without resources, with Oswald spreading lies about your sanity. They'll have you in an asylum within the month." "Then what would you have me do?" Eleanor whirled to face him. "Stay here and ruin you? Watch society tear you apart for harbouring a woman everyone thinks is mad or scheming?" "I would have you stay and fight." Gabriel stood, moving closer. "I would have you stop assuming that running is your only option. Running has kept me alive. And now you're not running anymore. You're safe. You're building a case that will bring Oswald to justice." His voice softened. "You don't have to keep surviving, Eleanor. You're allowed to start living." She stared at him, this impossible duke who'd carried her out of darkness and refused to let her disappear back into it. "Why do you care so much?" Gabriel was quiet for a long moment. "Because watching you hide your intelligence to avoid notice is infuriating. Because you make my aunt laugh in ways she hasn't in years. Because every morning at breakfast, I find myself hoping you'll argue with me about something. That's not an answer either." "It's the only answer I have right now." They stood in silence, the space between them charged with something neither was willing to name. Then Lady Agnes's voice rang from the hallway. "Gabriel, Eleanor, dinner's getting cold." And the moment broke. A week later, Gabriel received word that Oswald Hart had arrived in London and was spreading his own version of events. Eleanor was mentally unstable. Gabriel was being manipulated. The widow should be sent to a quiet institution for her own good. "He's trying to paint you mad and me a fool," Gabriel told Eleanor, his jaw tight with anger. "He'll approach us soon, under the guise of concern. What do we do? We answer him. On our terms." 3. Oswald Hart arrived at Gabriel's townhouse 3 days later, dressed in expensive clothes and wearing a mask of concern. "Your Grace," he bowed with oily politeness. "Thank you for receiving me. I've been so worried about dear Eleanor." Eleanor sat rigid in her chair, hands folded to hide their trembling. Gabriel had positioned himself nearby, close enough to intervene, but not close enough to seem protective. "Mr. Hart." Gabriel's voice was pleasant and cold. "How kind of you to call." Oswald turned to Eleanor with false sympathy. "My dear sister, you look so much better than when I last saw you. I'm so relieved you're receiving proper care." "Proper care." Eleanor's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Is that what you call chains in a cellar?" Oswald's smile flickered. "You see, Your Grace? These delusions. She imagines things that never happened. It's a symptom of her condition." "And what condition would that be exactly?" "Hysteria, of course, brought on by grief over my brother's death. The physicians were quite clear she needs rest, quiet, supervision." Oswald leaned forward confidentially. "I know a very discreet establishment that specializes in cases like hers. An asylum." Gabriel's voice was ice. "A place of healing, for her own good." Oswald spread his hands. "I only want what's best for my late brother's wife." Eleanor felt the familiar panic rising. This was how it had happened before. Oswald speaking reasonably, painting her as unstable, making everyone doubt her sanity. She'd protested, fought, argued, and ended up in chains. But this time was different. This time, Gabriel spoke, Mr. Hart, I've seen the ledgers from my cousin's estate. His voice was calm, almost conversational. The forged signatures, the missing funds, the systematic theft that began within weeks of your brother's death. Oswald's face went pale. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Mrs. Hart discovered your embezzlement. She threatened to expose you. So you declared her mad and imprisoned her in a cellar until she either died or broke. This is outrageous. I have witnesses. I have documents. I have the physician who examined Mrs. Hart when I found her, who will testify to the state of her injuries. Gabriel stood, looming over Oswald. So here is what will happen. You will leave my house. You will cease spreading lies about Mrs. Hart's mental state, and you will await the legal consequences of your actions. You can't prove anything. But Oswald's voice had lost its confidence. I already have. The question is whether you'd prefer to settle this quietly or in open court, where every newspaper in London will report on the gentleman who chained his brother's widow in a cellar. Oswald fled within the hour. That evening, Eleanor found Gabriel in his study, staring at the fire. Thank you, she said quietly. You didn't have to defend me like that. Yes, I did. You've damaged yourself. People will think. I don't care what people think. Gabriel turned to face her. Eleanor, I've spent years caring about reputation, about propriety, about what society expected of a duke. And where did it get me? A comfortable life where I never did anything that mattered. Finding me was an accident. The best accident of my life. He moved closer. You asked me once why I care so much. I figured out the answer. Eleanor's heart hammered. And I care because you're the bravest person I've ever met. Because you survived something that would have broken anyone else and came out still fighting. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for. Gabriel, I love you. The words came out raw, unpolished. I love your stubbornness and your intelligence, and the way you refuse to be grateful for things you've earned. I love that you argue with me about estate management, and that my aunt threatens to adopt you. I love. Eleanor kissed him. It wasn't graceful or planned. She simply stepped forward, pulled his face down to hers, and pressed her lips to his. He froze for a heartbeat. Then his arms came around her, and he was kissing her back with a desperate tenderness that made her knees weak. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. I should warn you, he said quietly, that I'm about to propose marriage, and I'm going to be terrible at it. Eleanor laughed, the sound shaky and wet. Then let me save you the trouble. Yes. You don't even know what I was going to say. Were you going to offer me separate income, legal protections, and a say in estate matters? Yes. Were you going to assure me I'd never be anyone's secret or prisoner again? Yes. Were you going to tell me you want a partner, not a rescued damsel? Gabriel smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. You've been reading my notes. I've been listening. Eleanor touched his face gently. Yes, Gabriel, yes to all of it. For the wedding was small, dignified, almost modest for a duke. Society came out of curiosity, expecting scandal, and finding instead a quiet ceremony between two people who looked at each other like no one else existed. Eleanor wore ivory silk her own choice, not borrowed finery. Gabriel had offered her anything she wanted, grand cathedrals, elaborate gowns, celebrations that would dazzle London. She'd asked for simplicity. I've had enough spectacle, she told him. I just want to marry you. Lady Agnes wept through the entire ceremony, claiming loudly that she had dust in her eye. Martha stood among the servants, beaming with proprietary pride. The whispers continued, of course, the widow from the cellar. the Duke's mysterious rescue. But as weeks turned to months, the tone began to shift. People saw Eleanor at Gabriel's side during estate business, asking sharp questions that made accountants sweat. They saw her establishing charitable programs for widows in difficult circumstances, using her own experience to identify what help was actually needed. They saw the way Gabriel looked at her, the way he deferred to her judgment, the way he laughed at things she said. "They actually like each other," Lady Thornhill observed at one tea party. "How refreshing. I heard she saved the estate thousands of pounds by catching an error in the ledgers," another woman replied. Well, she would know about ledgers, wouldn't she? Given everything she uncovered about that dreadful brother-in-law. Oswald Hart faced charges for unlawful imprisonment and fraud. The settlement cost him nearly everything, and the scandal destroyed what remained of his reputation. Eleanor felt no satisfaction in his ruin, only relief that it was over. But it wasn't her past that defined her now. It was her present. One evening, nearly a year after the wedding, Eleanor and Gabriel walked through the restored wing of the estate, where she'd once been imprisoned. The cellars had been cleared, the bolt removed from the wall, the windows opened to let in light. Eleanor paused where the chain had once held her. Her ankle bore no scars now, but she remembered the weight of iron, the darkness, the despair. "Sometimes I still dream about it," she admitted quietly. Gabriel took her hand. "I know. I've held you through those dreams. Does it bother you that I'm not a whole? You're the most complete person I've ever known." He turned her to face him. "Eleanor, I don't see the woman chained in the cellar anymore. I see the woman who walked out and kept walking. You carried me out. Once, you've carried yourself ever since." Eleanor leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. This impossible man who'd found her at her lowest and seen her strength instead of her weakness. "If you'd known," she said, "that carrying a stubborn widow out of a cellar would lead to all this trouble, the scandal, the legal battles, my aunt threatening to move in permanently, would you still have done it?" Gabriel pretended to consider the question. "The scandal was manageable. The legal battles were satisfying. Your aunt threatening to move in is genuinely terrifying." He smiled. "Yes, I would have done it twice." Eleanor laughed, the sound light and free in a way it hadn't been for years. "Next time, Your Grace, I'll walk out beside you from the start. I'm counting on it." They stood together in the space where darkness had once held her, sunlight streaming through windows that hadn't existed before. Behind them, the sounds of the household drifted down, servants preparing dinner, Lady Agnes calling for Martha, the normal rhythms of a life being lived. Eleanor had been a widow, chained and forgotten, left to die in darkness. Now she was a duchess, standing in light she'd helped create, loved by a man who saw her as a partner rather than a rescue. The chains were gone. The cellar was empty. And Eleanor Hart-Thorne had walked out of the darkness and into a future she'd chosen for herself. That was the only ending that mattered.